These were individuals who behaved in a terroristic manner based on a sense, a belief, a fixed false belief that has been carried on for generations.
Welcome back to Funky Politics. I'm Terence Patterson, and I'm excited to be back with you guys. And thank you for joining us for Funky Politics, where we always keep it real, righteous, 100, and funky. And we're excited to be joined with some new panelists where we're going to just heat this thing up. We're joined with Dr. Altha Stewart, Jasper Hendricks, and DeNeia Thomas. DeNeia Thomas can't be with us for this episode, but we're fired up. She is working with Texas Southern University, and we are super excited to get her with us for the next episode. But before we get going, I want to make sure the panelists get a chance to go around the horn and share a little bit give us a little elevator speech about who you are before we get into this thing.
Hi, I'm Dr. Altha Stewart. I'm a native of Memphis. I'm on the faculty at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center here in Memphis, Tennessee, where I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Community Health Engagement. That means that I'm out in the community helping people understand how their health can be improved by empowering them with information. Happy to be joining the Funky Politics panel.
Thanks, Dr. Stewart. We're fired up to have you with us. And up next is Jasper Hendricks III. Jasper.
Hey, and thank you for having me. I am an activist and strategist that's based in Nashville, Tennessee, by way of Virginia, more specifically born and raised in Farmville, Virginia. And I'm looking forward to the awesome discussions that we're about to have. Thank you.
Great. Look, let's jump in. There is no mistake that we are starting our session off with the anniversary of the insurrection on the Capitol. This was a moment that was unlike any other, frankly, since the 1800s. And let's call it what it is, because we always keep it real. It was a domestic terrorist attack. It was a global embarrassment on our country and our democracy. And so we cannot let this thing go. We need to jump right in and let's talk about it. Jasper, look, this is your bag, man. How you feeling a year later on what's happening and what happened on that fateful day?
Yeah, so I mean, thank you for the question, and and to me, as a person who's worked in those halls, had worked in that building for a few years, and also someone who know a lot of people who worked in that building who currently works there. It was very shocking for me to see that day. I actually happened to be watching. I was at a local place here in Nashville, and doing some work, and I happened to look up at the TV and see that our capital is under siege, by people. And I actually, the main reason why I actually went to that place, ironically enough, was because I was actually watching the president's speech. As a person who studies political science, I actually was a presidential elector back in 2016. So this process is very near and dear to me, having to have gone through this process just 4 years prior to. And so I'm looking and as I'm listening to his words, I say that, it's very dangerous. As I see Secret Service moving back, I'm looking at the postures and I'm like, this isn't going to end well. And so I ended up wanting to distract myself by going to this restaurant to work and with friends, and we happen to look at the TV and we see that we see what was going on. I immediately just text some of my friends and I'm getting messages back from members of Congress that said that they're hiding under their desk with their family members. Because, again, you have to remember, this is a solemn practice that our country participates in every 4 years, and if you are a true fan of history, this is a place where you will be to watch the transition of power that we go through as a nation, and to have these members of Congress texting me back saying that they are hiding under their desk with family members because they don't know what's about to happen to them or their family members, was very heartening, for me. And as a year later, looking back at the trials, I think we spent more time, or as Congress has spent more time on Benghazi, for example, and having, wanting to have former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to sit hours upon hours before committees to explain what happened in Benghazi, but the same people do not want to take the same amount of time to investigate what happened, this day in our United States Capitol, one of the most protected places, and just having to work there, just remembering the false alarms and what that caused, during while we were there working, and all of a sudden bells started going off, and police officers showing up at your office and whisking you away, in black cars and driving you off somewhere, and just to be said, oh, false alarm, a plane flew into restricted airspace, but to actually have it happen, I can only imagine what those people were going through, and I don't think that we've learned our lesson a year later.
Dr. Stewart, what's on your mind?
Well, as Jasper was speaking, I'm actually remembering watching myself that day, and I'm getting goosebumps and chills just thinking about the reactions that I was having that day, as well as what I imagine was going through the minds of those people who were terrified, as he described it, hiding under their desk, calling loved ones, saying, "I don't know what's going to happen," not knowing what's going to happen next. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is something that you started with. Words matter. And in this particular situation, calling it what it is very important to contextualizing for everybody that this was not just a protest march gone wrong, that this was not something that just kind of happened out of the blue. This was orchestrated. This was built and based on hundreds of years of fixed false beliefs about one group by another group that compels them to behave in ways when they feel positions are being attacked, or they're about to lose something or have lost something. In my profession, I'm a psychiatrist. In my profession, when I say fixed false belief, I'm talking about somebody who is out of touch with reality. And in this situation, what you said, Terence, is exactly what happened. These were individuals who behaved in a terroristic manner based on a sense, a belief, a fixed false belief that has been carried on for generations around what the have and the privileges ought to have and must retain, versus what the people who don't deserve are getting that they don't deserve. And that just, I mean, when we say words like race and racism and white supremacy, these behaviors that we witnessed, these behaviors that we witnessed by leaders in this country at the time, by people who had sworn an oath to protect this country. I mean, Jasper said it well. We spent more time on Hillary Clinton testifying on Benghazi than we have yet to spend on what actually happened a year ago and how do we make sure it doesn't happen again. I can't say that because these beliefs are not true, that these are people with a mental illness. Although there are people who would argue that if you carry on for generations those kinds of beliefs, pass them on to your children, who pass them on to their children, and then deny that they exist. There are people who would argue that's a serious mental illness. I'm not in that camp. I think this was intentional. I think the people who provoked and drove it knew exactly the outcome they sought. I think the fact that it happened on that particular day was very telling. Jasper, you talk about one of the most serious moments in our democracy is that peaceful transition of power. There was no peace that day. There was no peace that day.
Right.
But I guess from my standpoint, I go back and forth. Is this a problem of white privilege, or is this just one of the necessary things that has to happen at times and at certain moments with our democracy. We always talk about democracy is messy, right? Like this is an experiment that we have been going through as a nation for quite a long time now. And was this sort of just inevitable? Certainly, we could point fingers at Donald Trump. We could point fingers to a number of people, which frankly they have been subpoenaed, and those fingers are getting pointed and questions are getting answered. But what is this more of? Was this a problem of white privilege, or was this just sort of a complication of a messy democracy?
Well, I would say that, I wouldn't just leave it, number one, the blame with the people that you mentioned, nor the people who have been subpoenaed before the January 6th Commission. I also put blame in the media. I also put blame in, social media platforms that allow the spread of misinformation and false information. I blame the people who continuously retweet, and share this false information for whatever purpose, whether they're just like trying to say, look at this false stuff. If you're sharing it, you're giving it some kind of credence. You're giving it power. You're elevating it, by the number of impressions. That's what we see when algorithms happen. And you wonder why you start seeing certain articles or certain things pop up in your newsfeed. You're sharing this information, and I think that people, once we stop that, I think Italy, should have been talked about a little bit more. When they had the same type of leader take over, the people just ignored them. And therefore they say, like, for instance, we're a nation, we do not legislate on Twitter, but everything that this man said and did on Twitter, the news turned it into, it was fact. Now, granted, it may have happened later, but the thing was, we do not legislate via Twitter, and so, or any other social media platforms. So I think we need to step back and take a look at, how we all played a role into what happened. I sort of blame myself because after the 2016 election, I said this wasn't fun anymore, and I got out of it. And so, but now I'm back in, because I sat back and I looked and I said, you know what, I could be part of the problem if I would have went out and actually ran a couple of more elections and we would have won, we would have had a couple more members of Congress. So, but it was my fault. I decided to sit out. And so, so I think that, before we start looking at the blame, I think we need to take a look at ourselves and what role we played.
Yeah, but now I don't want to get you off the hook now, Jasper, because the question was really, was it about white privilege or was it messy democracy? And I know you flipped it and you talked about social media.
I mean, because it wasn't. I mean, when you talk about white privilege, I mean, when you take a look at some of these people who are being, I don't know if it was white privilege, is that it was all the dog whistles, it was all the false narratives that were put out there, and these people actually believe this stuff. They actually believe that the election was stolen. That isn't white privilege. That was put in their mind by someone so they're believing this stuff. And so the news that they're watching, the people that they're listening to are still saying this message. And so to them, they believe it. So that's why I say it's hard for me to say that it's white privilege. It's because they actually believe this stuff. Even if you talk to them, I do political commentary on Fox and on Fox News in national. These people actually believe it.
Right. But having the belief is one thing, but I think where I'm going is, but to actually act on that belief, be able to walk into the Capitol 700 deep and do what they did. I think that's where I'm going. Dr. Stewart, I see you moving a little bit. What you got?
Yeah, you saw me. Because we're now in my wheelhouse. Like Jasper, I am a student of history. He studies political history, and I study what I would call kind of the psychological behavioral history of the way we came to be who we are today. And from a psychological standpoint, I want to pick up where Jasper started. And left off, that we're dealing with a community, a national community of people who feel like they have lost, for many of them, they have lost things that belong to them. They were told they would have these things. And in their minds, and it's important to remember, this is in their mind. And I'm not saying this is a mental illness and so they should be let off the hook. I'm just talking to you about how we all act on what we believe and feel and think. And once that narrative, that false narrative, began to grow wings and fly around, everybody latched onto it. It became, well, because those people have stuff, I can't have stuff. They shouldn't get that because they don't deserve it. They're not worthy. You know, any number of that piece of the narrative latched on to someone who wound up being at the Capitol that day and carried that belief in. All of those people in their costumes with their shouting whatever they were shouting, those were based on what they believed to be their truth at the time, and it really didn't matter. I mean, I'm like you. I don't want Jasper to feel like he got to fall on his sword, but there is enough responsibility, and I won't say blame, but responsibility to go around for everybody, for my field, for example, to do a better job of helping people understand cultural impact of racism and stuff, so that we would have based laws on better things and created policies that didn't rely on affirmative action, that we would have spread the word of health for all. And particularly emotional well-being and psychological wellness for all. These are, for the most part, what we witnessed were people who believed that they had no reason not to believe what they believed. They were it was set in stone. And the more it circled around social media and the news media and word of mouth, and the more things were blown out of proportion. I mean, there's a certain intentionality by some that is required to keep this momentum going. But this was like a convergence of horrible pieces of the messy democracy going head on into each other. And the result was what we saw. Now, the unfortunate thing is that it wasn't just the people who ran in. Some of this was based on the people who were in. And that's also, I think, that we haven't paid a lot of attention to, because when the people who were complicit in this and helped to arrange and provoke and direct and lead it are also part of our national structure, then we got a real problem. Because now we know there are people who don't just believe it, they actually have ideas for how to enact it. Now that's a scary thing. When I stop and think about that, that's a scary thing. Yeah.
And that's what I was actually going to mention. I don't think that the people who acted upon it were those white, the privileged folks. It was the people who were pulling the strings. Those are the folks that we need to be watching out for. We need to be paying attention to, because they're the ones that are spreading the lies, that are indoctrinating these folks with this false information. But I do have hope that, with the chair of the January 6th Commission is, Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi, who's also the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, because this is a Homeland Security issue. These folks are a danger to our nation, and so I do believe that he will get to the bottom of it. You don't just become the chair of Homeland Security Committee, and especially a Black man this day and time, without having to put in your work. So I think we need to watch out for him and see what his next moves will be, when Congress do come back into session January 10th. I think it's going to be a big week that week.
Yeah. And do you guys believe that the January 6th Commission is the right place to legislate this? Because what I'm hearing is perhaps it's at the voter booth, right? We've got to continue to make sure that we are electing the right folks that will protect our democracy, certainly have differing views. But I guess my question is, the January 6th Commission, is it symbolic? Like, will we really get anything from it? Or to really move forward from this, is it really going to have to rely on action from we the people?
Well, it's both. So those people who are on the January 6th Commission are up for re-election in November, and if Congress doesn't stay the way that it is, and if we don't increase the number of seats on the Senate, then no, it's not going to go anywhere. Because then the other folks who will be in power are the ones who don't want this to come to light. And so to answer your question is going to take both. The January 6th Commission has to start. It has to start there because Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives and the United States Congress is its own entity. So when we work there, we have our own, you have your own rules, there in the building. Like it may have been illegal to smoke in places, for example, as states were implementing anti-smoking laws. I think when I worked there in 05, 06, and 07, 08, you could still smoke inside the building. Still members of Congress smoking cigars inside the building. It's its own. They have their own rules, and so the commission is necessary in order to start the prosecution process outside in the courts.
Yeah. Well, look, we are running low on time. We could talk about this and dig in even more. But as we get close to time, maybe just give your last kind of 20-second thoughts. Like, what should we be thinking about as a nation? Dr. Stewart, how would you take us home?
Well, I'm going to go with Jasper and say both and. I think the work that is going on to uncover as much as we can find out about who else was involved and how deep this goes is important work. But I don't, from a psychological standpoint, I don't want people to get so frustrated and depressed about the fatality of all of this, that it's never going to make a difference, that they don't remember. We have to be, it is we the people. We have to take some responsibility and be accountable at the local level as well as the national level for that judge, for that DA, for that congressperson, for that senator who sits there making laws that will impact us.
Yeah, no, this is quite a moment, and we can't miss the moment. And I know there's more to talk about, but we're out of time. And I'm sure we will continue to talk about this. But I do want to thank you guys for joining me. I am fired up about funky politics, and we did not disappoint. We kept it real, righteous, and funky today. So please make sure you follow us on Instagram at Politics Funky and on Facebook at Funky Politics, where you can also share and tell a friend. And then make sure you check out our other shows on the KUDZUKIAN network. And until next time, we'll see you.